Oh, welcome. Welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled today to bring you my just a wonderful, wonderful agent of transformation who has so many lessons for us. So, Lyena Strelkoff, I met about 10 years ago at a business conference, and it was easy to pick her out of a crowd because she was the beautiful woman in the wheelchair. And when she took the stage, my attention and everyone in the hall was riveted because, Lyena, you described, so the accident that made you a paraplegic happened 20 years ago now. And I recall you saying something like, when I heard the branch crack, I said yes, I surrendered to the journey. So I would love for you to tell our listeners and our viewers what was going through your mind, what happened. You had been a lifelong theater, you had been an actor, you had been a dancer, very physically active. Your whole life was around physical activity and movement and expression through movement when this accident happened. So how did you have the presence of mind? What had prepared you to say yes?
Oh, that's such a big question. What had prepared me? My life up until that moment had prepared me. I was 33 when I became injured. And I was a very anxious person. I was, in many ways, I was afraid of life. You might not know that to look at me from the outside. I did a lot of things that people consider courageous. I moved to Europe by myself after I graduated college, and I trekked the rainforest in Bali by myself. But I was always trying to control my life. I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. And so by the time I was 8, I was in high control mode to make sure that bad things didn't happen to me. And I was really tired. I was exhausted from that. So at 33, I was on a date with a man I had just started dating. I'd been friends with him for several years, but we'd just for a few months been dating. And we were hiking in the Malibu Hills in October, and it was incredibly hot. And we left the trail to go into a grove of oak trees. Now, I grew up in wild places. I started backcountry backpacking when I was 5, without a tent, without a bathroom, without anything, just me and my dad. So I was very comfortable in the wild. And I had always climbed trees. And I was feeling particularly anxious that day about this new relationship. And I thought, I will feel better in the arms of this tree. And so I started climbing an oak tree. And before I knew it, I was probably about 25 feet up.
Wow.
And I climbed down a bit, and my friend, my date, was also in the tree. And he started telling this really long joke, and I was waiting for the punchline. And while I was waiting, I heard this loud crack. And I immediately realized what was happening. And I reached in front of me to see, I was standing on 2 big branches, and I reached in front of me to see if there was anything I could grab, and there was nothing there. And I don't know if it's because I was so tired of all of this control effort for decades. I don't know if it was something about this was simply the moment in my life when I was supposed to be able to do this. But I realized instantly that I was at a choice point. And I could do what I had done all my life and try to control what was about to happen. Or I could let go. And I could surrender to this fall. And I simply chose to let go. And all of a sudden, I dropped into slow motion. And this incredible peace came over me. And I had time to notice the shape of my body in space and the leaves on the trees, and time to notice my noticing. It was truly blissful and deeply, deeply spiritual, like falling into a world that I'd never been in before. And then the ground shot up and hit me. I was falling backwards, so I never saw the ground coming. And I was up there for me, it felt like I was hanging in the air, like I was up there forever.
Yeah.
So I was completely shocked when the planet crashed into me. And I never lost consciousness. But I couldn't breathe. I was having a really hard time breathing, and I couldn't tell where my legs were. Like I had the sensation that they were in a particular place, but I could see with my eyes that they weren't there. And even then, as the reality began to unfold, that I had broken my back, I had crushed my spinal cord, I was instantly and completely paralyzed from the waist down. I had a hole in my right lung. That lung was collapsed. Like we were in a really critical situation. And I continued to feel totally calm. And my life changed utterly in that moment. And I'm not talking about paralysis. Like I lived in one world when I climbed the tree, and when I hit the ground, I was a different person and in a different world.
And so tell us about your date.
His name is Dean. And boy, bless his heart, he was in a real panic that day. For me, it was this really blissful experience. And for him, it was a second and a half of pure terror and horror. And we were so new. I really, no one had any idea where we were going or what our relationship was going to be even before that. And then we were thrown into this whirlwind of trauma and drama. But somehow we kept turning back to each other, and we kept finding each other again and again. And today I've been married to him now for 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have a son together.
Wow. So obviously there were some good things that came from this, and you describe that, well, you describe this as your hero's journey, your shero's journey.
Mm.
And I'm wondering if you can, because you have shared personally with me your relationship with the tree, which is so moving to me. I'm wondering if you would be willing to share, what was your relationship with the cause of all of this?
Yeah. When I first started telling these stories, the very first audience I had, the very first time, it was 7 months post-injury. And somebody asked me in the Q&A, like, aren't you mad at that stupid tree? And I felt this incredible opening in my heart, because I had never felt mad. What I felt was that the tree was my companion, my partner in this experience. I needed to grow. I needed to go through this metamorphosis so that I could stop living a life of fear and control and exhaustion, and start actually living and embracing my life and embracing the possibilities that are present in every life. And I couldn't do that by myself. And so this tree said, I will help you. I will give up my branch and I will help you do that. So I felt so incredibly bonded to that tree. On the 2-year anniversary, we actually went back to Charmley Park where the accident happened.
We, meaning you and Dean.
Dean and I and some friends of ours. Yeah.
Wow.
We went back to Charmley Park. And Dean had done something really bizarre, actually, while I was in the hospital doing my acute rehab right after I was injured. In the months I was in the hospital for 2 months after I was injured. So while I was in the hospital, he had gone back to Charmley to try to figure out what had happened, because it had happened so fast.
Right.
And so he was confused and trying to put the pieces together for himself. So he went back, he climbed the tree, he figured out where I was standing, where he was standing, how it had happened. And he found the branch that broke, which was a small branch that I had been resting one hand on. And he brought that branch home. So when I got out of the hospital, the first time that I went back to his apartment after I got out of the hospital, there was like this little shrine to Lyena. It had like all the pictures that he had of me, every gift I had given him in the years I had known him, notes I had written him about whatever, really unimportant things, but my hair ties, anything that was associated with me was all there. And in the center of it was this branch. And so I kept it, and I built a whole altar around it, actually, because this was the core symbol of my transformation. And 2 years later, when we went back, that was the first time I had gone back to the tree. I actually asked them to put me in the tree, and a couple of friends lifted me up and they put me on a really thick, low branch. And I gave the broken branch back to the tree. And for years and years after that, we went to visit. We went to visit after my son was born so he could meet the oak tree. We had birthday parties there underneath its branches. And every time I was around any oak tree, I felt like I was with family, that I was being held by cousins and aunts and uncles and oak trees all over the world. In fact, I have a photo of the tree if you'd like to see that.
Definitely. Yes.
Let me see if I can bring that up.
Oh, wow.
So this is our tree.
Wow.
And we were up in about the third tier of branches.
Okay.
That's her.
That's pretty high up. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Wow. Wow. So you really, not only did you, well, first Dean created an altar. I don't know if he would have called it that, but from my way of thinking, it was an altar.
Mine too. Mine too.
And then you took the branch and you created an altar. But that tree, which altered your life, completely, you hallowed or sanctified. You made sacred space, not just by how you held the tree in your own consciousness, but by going back and honoring the tree.
Well, it's really about creating relationship. It's about opening ourselves, I think, to what is there. The fact is, all that energy and all of that potential for relationship, it's always there. It's around us all the time, whether that's with nature, whether that's with our challenges, whether that's with our friends and family. Like, this potential for deep, meaningful, organic, authentic relationship exists.
Yeah.
And I just kept saying yes to that.
So when did you know, Lyena, when did you know that you were meant to share the story of what had happened to you?
Yeah.
Because you do this a lot. You've been, I wasn't the first, mine wasn't the first audience. By this time, when I met you, you were 10 years out from the accident. And a lot of what you do is speaking about what happened to you and how you were able to not just endure the adversity of the accident, but how you were able to transform, how it transformed you, and how you have kept transforming because of what you learned in the experience.
Yeah, it started in the hospital, actually. It was very obvious to me, I know, it's crazy. From the beginning, it was obvious to me that something had changed. And again, I'm not talking about the changes in my body, right? It was very obvious to me that something had changed. So even we were helivaced to UCLA Medical Center, which is the closest trauma center to where the accident happened. And I went right into surgery, essentially. And I was at UCLA for 10 days. And during that time, I don't know if you've ever been in the hospital, but you have a surgery and then they slowly downgrade you. You start out in the ICU and then, little by little, you get downgraded. So every couple of days, I would be in a different room on a different floor with a different staff. But the staff from previous floors kept coming to visit me. They would just show up. They'd be on a break and they'd come up to my room wherever I was, and they would just hang out for 10 minutes or so. And my friends who came, who were expecting me to be, I was a lifelong dancer. They were expecting me to be utterly devastated by what was happening.
Right.
And they would come in and say, like, you are actually glowing. Like, what is happening here? And so I had a sense like something is happening here. I don't know what it is. I'm not doing it. It's just happening. I then went to Craig Hospital in Colorado to do my inpatient rehab because they were a specialty hospital for spinal cord injury.
Okay.
And the same thing started happening there. My psychologist on my team at Craig, the first time she met me, she asked me to tell her, tell me a little bit about how you got here, right? Why are you in this hospital? And I told her a 20-minute story. I told her a version of the story I just told you. And she said, first of all, I want you to know that most people give me like 3 sentences. So this is really unusual, what's happening here. And she said, secondly, I know it's much too soon for you to think about this, but I want to tell you that I see you telling these stories, like to the world, like on television. And I thought, this woman is out of her mind. Like, I can't dress myself yet. I don't know how to pee. I gotta figure out all these logistics. Like, my whole life is changing. But I guess it planted some sort of seed. When I got out of the hospital, about 2 months out of the hospital, I suddenly was absolutely compelled to start telling these stories. Like, there had just been miracle after miracle after miracle. Like, my whole world had become this alive, vibrant, beautiful, terrifying, hard, scary, painful, but exquisite place. And I thought, if I am the only one who's going to benefit from this, I paid way too high a price. So I just was compelled. And I put together something very informal, one day, friends and family only. And I just sat on the stage and basically told stories for 2.5 hours. And we videotaped the whole thing. And when I looked at first of all, while I was doing it, I could tell that like something is happening here in this audience. Like, people who have friends of friends who came, who have no connection to me, who have no connection to paralysis, no connection to disability, no connection to anything, are going through these transformations in the room, which I didn't anticipate and certainly wasn't trying to facilitate. And then I looked at the video and I thought, who is that woman on the stage? Like, I've never seen her before. So that just started this ball rolling. And I ended up writing a full-length formal one-woman show, which I opened about 1.5 years later in Los Angeles. It was supposed to run for 3 weekends. To test out the material, we ended up extending 5 times. The show played for 6 months in its initial run. People just kept coming back over and over and over again. Then I started from there in being invited to speak at universities. And then invited to tour the show. So for the next 5 years, I did 5 or 6 national tours and spoke at colleges and universities and nonprofit organizations and churches and all over the country for years after that.
So do you have a sense? So when you're delivering this, when you are delivering this story, this sort of sacred transformation that you experienced, do you have a sense for how it's being received in the audience? Do you have a feeling that maybe it's being received as if you are giving people a map?
I know exactly how it's being received, because for those 90 minutes, we are in sacred relationship. And people within the first 10 minutes of the show have decided to trust me and to go on this journey with me. And I take that very seriously. That I become a lantern bearer. And we're going to go on this journey together. And I'm going to take you all the way through to the end. And people are changed by that.
Wow. So let's talk now about what you're doing in addition to the events and the speaking, because the reason we've reconnected is I've been following you for the last 10 years, and I saw you post something about having emerged from a new training and now ready to offer a new way of working with people privately. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. While I was performing, I started, I was meeting people all over the country. And I saw a lot of people in pain, a lot of people struggling with whatever their challenges were.
Right.
With their grief, with their pain, with their struggles. And it began to feel really uncomfortable for me to come into a community and tell this story and have this really powerful experience, and then we all just go home. Like, I wanted to hold a space for people that were hurting. I wanted to hold a space for healing. And so after my son was born, I didn't want to tour anymore. And I thought, this is the time to make this transition. And so at that time, I started actually a coaching practice and transformational coaching, which was wonderful, but also not quite the right fit for me. And it took me a long time to figure out why. I could feel that it wasn't, but I couldn't quite, like, what is the issue here? And then we went into pandemic. And I thought, this is the moment to let go of everything, to practice that surrender again, and see what emerges from these ashes. And I realized that I'll tell you a story. About 2 years after I was injured, I was having dinner with my mother. And I was marveling to her. How could such a horrible experience as my fall and such huge losses as paralysis have turned my life to such gold? Like, isn't that amazing? And my mother was sitting across the table, and she got very quiet and she said, "It is amazing, but how? How are you doing this?" And my mother is a child of war. She's a concentration camp survivor. She has seen unspeakable horror in her life. And I know that 70 years later, she's still having nightmares and still has her struggles with it. And so her question felt so personal and so urgent. Right. But I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how this was happening. I didn't know I didn't know. I couldn't tell her. And I thought, that's unacceptable. I need to understand better what's happening here. And so at that time, this is 18 years ago, I started to deconstruct. Like, do I have certain attitudes? Do I have certain beliefs or practices? Like, why is this going the way it's going? And it became clear to me that what I had going into the accident was an incredibly rich and personally meaningful spiritual life. And that was the foundation that was permitting this incredible embrace, this thriving. Even though I'm exactly as paralyzed today as, I mean, there's been no recovery whatsoever. And in fact, things have gotten harder because, you know, the longer my body goes being paralyzed, there's all these other systems that are involved and they're struggling. So it's actually gotten harder in 20 years. And yet I continue to thrive. So I knew that this rich and meaningful spiritual life was key. And when the pandemic came and I let go of everything, that came back to the surface. Like, this is the heart of what you know, what you understand, and what you live. And so I went back to school and I got my certification in interspiritual counseling and companioning.
Interspiritual
Counseling and companioning.
Companioning. That sounds amazing. It sounds amazing. Companioning is such a beautiful word. And it almost feels like it's been a lost art in our modern world. I would say a lot of the work I do with the grieving and even the dying could come under the category of being as a companion.
Yes.
So you got a degree in interspiritual counseling and companioning. Tell us what you do with that degree.
So I launched a private practice called Lantern Soul Care.
Okay. So now I need to know why you named it Lantern Soul, because I think there's a connection.
Because that's how I see myself. I see myself as a lantern bearer.
Right.
I don't have anybody's answers for them. I don't know your path. I don't know what turns it's going to take. But I have the ability to hold a space for you and to walk with you and to hold a light so that together we can look into those dark places and make meaning and find our nourishment and our path forward.
So it sounds like spiritual counseling is very different from coaching, which you were doing before.
Yeah. It's very different from coaching and it's very different from therapy. So coaching is very goal oriented.
Right.
It's very future oriented, right? You have a very clear vision of where you want to be. And coaching looks at the distance between where you are and where you want to be, figures out the steps to get there, holds you accountable, and takes you over there.
Yeah.
Right? It's very measured and clear and sort of productivity oriented in that way, expert driven, right? Which is a fabulous thing for certain kinds of work that you want to do, change that you want to make. So I'm not knocking coaching by any means, but it's very, very future oriented, goal driven, and steps.
Yes.
Therapy is inside the medical model. So it includes diagnosis, it includes treatment for mental disorders. None of that.
Isn't it also very often looking at the past?
Can be, for sure.
Yeah.
Like a deep analysis. You know, therapy is great when you want to answer the question, why?
Right. What happened?
Why do I behave this way in this situation? Well, let's look back at where this started and how it got, you know, imprinted in your brain. And
right.
Yeah. Coaching answers how do I do this? Therapy answers, why is this happening? Spiritual counseling answers, what? What is this about? What does this mean? What is happening here? Spiritual counseling holds a really large context, because everything that's happening to us, every joy we have, although that becomes, we just accept the joy. So, but every challenge, every struggle, every pain is happening in a bigger context. It isn't just the circumstance that's happening. And if we can be in that bigger context with our source, however we personally conceive of that source, then we can enter into a much more conscious relationship with it. And this is where healing becomes possible, even when cure is not.
Right. Right.
And that's what spiritual counseling does. Spiritual counseling is really about coming home to yourself, coming home to your true self,
Right.
coming home, whether you call that to the divine in you or your essence,
Right.
to spirit in you. It's coming home to that.
So I'm just curious a little bit, because I work with clients from all different backgrounds and persuasions. And so what I will very often do when I'm working with them is ask them what their terms are for the divine. I use the term the divine, but then when I'm working with them, I use their terms. Because we all have different names for the divine. And
Yes.
is that how you work, or do you, do you use your clients' language? Do you teach them a larger language? How do you?
I absolutely use my clients' language, because another thing that spiritual counseling also is not is religious education.
Right.
So I'm not here to teach people, say, how to be a good Catholic or a good Buddhist or a good Wiccan. That's not what I do. So it is about using their language. It's also about helping them. A big part of spiritual counseling is deepening your spiritual relationship.
Yeah.
Now, for many in this country, and a growing number, that's not attached to religion at all.
No.
We consider ourselves spiritual, but not religious. For many, the religious aspect is actually a hindrance.
Right.
So it's super important to work with whatever is meaningful to the person in the room.
Right.
And to help them deepen and broaden that experience for themselves.
Right.
So that they have it to lean into, so that they have it to replenish their stores, so that they have it to hold them.
Right.
Because that's what was happening for me. I was being held by that.
Right. Right. You, before the accident happened to you at age 33, you already had a spiritual context, and you were seeing your life in these from a spiritual perspective. So one of the things I facilitate a process for women, priestess process, that is part spiritual, it's part leadership. And one assignment that the women have is to tell the story of their life from their soul's perspective. And what that means in this context, what that means is when they had something difficult happen, they should ask themselves the question, why did this happen for me? Rather than why did this happen to me? And those of us who have had, for whatever reason, maybe training, maybe disposition, but we've had already in our younger years some exploration of the spiritual terrain, we are asking ourselves questions like, well, maybe is this maybe how I'm supposed to share in the sufferings of the world? Or why did this happen for me? we are going to get a different result than if we're looking through the lens or through the only the viewfinder of the ego, which is all concerned with survival and preservation and, you know, like the material well-being. We're going to have a very different result.
I love what your hands are doing. You're talking about this small vision versus this big vision. And that's exactly the difference. You know, the fact is on the practical plane, those experiences are happening to us. Like nobody wakes up one morning and says, you know what? I really want cancer. I'm going to make that happen. Or, you know what? I really want to lose a child. I really want to become paraplegic. You know, none of us have asked for these experiences. So in a very real sense, they happen to us, but they also can happen for us if we choose to ask that question.
Yeah.
Like some people believe that, you know, they have a connection to a God who has a plan, for instance, and that's already there for them. But that's not required. All that's required is to decide to ask, what might this be for? What might I use this for? What might it be teaching me? What might it be able to show me? Who can I become in this moment that I couldn't become 2 days ago? What's available to me? What is the invitation? That's my favorite way of looking at it. What is the invitation here? Because the situation is hard and I don't like it and it hurts me and it scares me and all of that is real and I don't want to bypass any of that.
Right.
That's important. That authenticity matters.
Right.
But I also want to ask, what's the invitation here? I'm being invited to something. What is that?
Right.
And in spiritual counseling, we look at, you know, not just ways to deepen your personal relationship with source, however you name and call and understand that, but also to look at the challenges that you're facing in this spiritual context. So in that way, it's similar to therapy. We do talk about your troubles at work with your coworker or with your child or the grief that you're feeling. There is a place for all of that, but we're looking through the spiritual lens.
Yeah.
We're asking, where is source in this experience?
When I was going through a really difficult time, a really painful divorce, my oldest child, who was 9 years old at the time, came running to me. Mom, Mom, and she had a book in her hands. Mom, listen to this. And she read me this little poem, after which I was so impressed. I asked her to write it on a little card, and I carry it. I still have it in her 9-year-old handwriting. And here's what she read to me. Know all of the questions, but never the answers. Look for the different instead of the same. Never walk where there's room for running, and don't do anything that can't be a game. I just was so moved by that because in my growing up years and the way that I was operating my life at that time, there was one right choice. There was one straight and narrow path. And if you like strayed off of it or got pushed out, like it was just a disaster. Like there was only one way to be.
To be.
And there was something about her joy of feeling a bit of expansion, because of course that's what I knew. That's what I was teaching my kids. And there was such an innocent joy in this 9-year-old of saying, what if we just stayed in the inquiry instead of thinking we know the right answer for ourselves, but also everyone else? That poem just so shifted my perspective on life. And really, I have a coach who has been famous for helping me stay in the inquiry. which is basically what we're talking about, is
Mhm.
what can be a larger way to hold this thing that has happened? What's a larger way to hold it? How about if we stay in the inquiry of why is this happening for me, not just to me? And we're going to get a different result depending on the questions we're living.
And most of us need help. We need support to stay in that inquiry. It's very hard to do that by ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's a tremendous amount of pressure, both internal and external, to have the answer, to arrive at an answer. It's very challenging to do that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, the motto of Lantern Soul Care is it's meant to be a light in the dark, guiding ourselves home to ourselves. Because none of us was meant to walk alone.
Yeah.
We simply aren't meant to walk alone. And that's my greatest joy. If I can be that companion, if I can be that safe place.
So tell me, how would someone know if they would be a good fit for you? If they would be a good fit, how would they know? What
Mm-hmm.
would they be going through right now that they would be able to say, yeah, this would be a good fit for me?
Well, the first and foremost is a desire, a longing to deepen and expand their spiritual lives. That they recognize already that that is something that speaks to them, even if they have no real spiritual practice now. But there's just something in the heart that says, oh, that I want that. I I have an intuition that that would really help me to have that. I have positioned my practice at the intersection of healthcare and spirituality. So I work with anyone who has that longing, but more specifically, I work with all healing professionals, healthcare professionals, with caregivers who are like family caregivers, unpaid caregivers, and those living with chronic health issues. That's really the core of my practice. And from this interspiritual perspective, I work with people of all faiths and none.
Right. Right.
To develop what is a rich and meaningful spiritual life for them. So I think if the longing is there, generally when people hear me or have this conversation with me, they just know. They just feel that sense of this just I want to move toward this. And the real trick is trusting that.
Yeah.
Is trusting that impulse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question about your mother. Did she ever find an answer to her question?
Well, she spent the last 20 years watching me. She now lives with us. She'll be 90 in November. So for the last 5 years, we've shared a home with her. I think she's definitely still asking for herself. But I think what she sees is possibilities that weren't there before. And sometimes I think that is one of the primary jobs of a spiritual counselor. That when someone is struggling, regardless of what they're struggling with, it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that that very struggle could be your deliverance. And I think that possibility, because I have lived it so acutely myself, because I have lived in such deep relationship with it, that's a possibility that I can hold.
Yeah.
No matter the pain, no matter how hard it is, no matter the struggle, no matter the catalyst, no matter what caused that pain and that struggle, there is this possibility for becoming more,
Right.
becoming better, becoming greater, becoming wholer. It's about returning to our innate wholeness.
Yeah. And living in this way, living in this inquiry gives us, because we're so expansive, we're not looking for something small. We're looking from a big perspective. It changes things in a synchronistic kind of way that allows grace in. And some people call it grace, and some people call it magic, and it doesn't matter what we call it.
No, it absolutely doesn't. You know, that's what I love about interspirituality, about that perspective. You know, all humans experience awe. All humans experience grace. All humans experience a sense of connection to something bigger. But how we get there is very different. Some people arrive through scripture. Some people arrive through a walk by the ocean. Some people arrive through painting or writing music. Some people arrive by meditation or prayer or contemplation or journaling, or
Yes.
there's all these paths. But we all have that experience, and interspirituality works on that level. That's what it concerns itself with, this shared human experience. And I love the breadth of that, the openness of that, the inclusion of that.
Yeah.
There is no one right way. There is the way that works for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my hope is that everyone has a path to that. And that we can, if you don't have a path to that I can help you find a path to that works for you.
Yeah.
And that everything that's going on in your life can be experienced through this context, so that we're always being fed. We're always having our reserves replenished.
Yeah.
So we're always being held.
Thank you so much. This has just been so rich. So if someone was interested in checking out your work or your offers, where would they find you?
So they can find me on the web at lanternsoulcare.com. And I'm happy to connect with anyone. The best way to do that is to actually schedule a meeting with me. It's usually a 20 to 30-minute meeting. It's free. It's just for us to meet each other and get a sense. You can ask your questions and feel into the energy of this, and if it feels right or not. I love those conversations. I love exploring and being together and seeing what comes of it. So I wholeheartedly open that invitation.
Beautiful. And we'll put all of that in the show notes so people will have an easy time connecting. And thank you so much for just being willing to share some time today and share what you're doing. I think it's a brilliant and beautiful resource.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Melody. It's really my pleasure to talk about it, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Oh, all right.